tonight, and thank Libby for putting this on. I have to say, I feel like I'm a little lonely on this side of the table. But my name is Jonathan Giancroce, and I'm the Liberal candidate for Durham. And I'm running in this election because I believe we need a Durham MP, not an Ottawa MP, one who stands up for the residents of Durham. And I know this means this. So having worked in a constituency office, this means listening to all the concerns a constituent has, and not being aggressively partisan, of course. And this should require you to live in the riding. And I'm a proud resident of this riding and an active community member who wants to help build up the community. And a member of parliament should also be able to deliver more, and that's what I want to do. Like I said, I want to fight for constituents. I don't want to be, and I want to be able to listen to all the concerns, and of course do what's best for the riding. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. Next, we'll hear from Brenda Virtue of the People's Party of Canada.
Thank you very much, Steve. So I'm delighted to be here tonight, and thank you so much for everyone who came out tonight, and thank you for Libby as well. And I am so honored to be the candidate for the People's Party of Canada. We are the fastest growing party in Canadian history. Really, as of last week, we had 315 candidates already in the 338 ridings, and we've only existed since last September. So that is history making. We're a real grassroots party made up of all different kinds of people from all ethnic backgrounds, all religious backgrounds, and we are a party that is for the people. And Max Bernier is our leader, and he's known as Mad Max. And the reason he's mad is because he feels Canadians are not being taken care of. Our government, sadly, is spending a lot of money on other nations and other situations and not taking care of Canadians first. So the People's Party is for the people, and I am so proud to represent them here tonight. And I thank you all for coming. I was born and raised in Bowmanville, and I worked in Bowmanville Hospital and Oshawa Hospital in emergency and ICUs. And so I know how to take care of people. That has been my life, is serving people. And I feel like it has prepared me perfectly for politics, because politics is a servant job, to serve the people. Not to do what I want to do, but to listen to the people, to hear their problems and help them find solutions. And so I thank you all for coming tonight, and just may you enjoy listening to the debate tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Brenda. Now we'll hear from Sarah Whalen-Wright, the NDP candidate. Sarah?
Hi, so I'm Sarah Whalen-Wright. I'm super proud to be running for the NDP. We have built up a lot of momentum over the past little while, and hopefully people have been watching the debates, the leaders' debates on TV. It makes me really proud to be running for a party whose leader is Jagmeet Singh. I also wanted to say hello and bonjour and ani bonjour, and I wanted to recognize in the in the spirit of truth and reconciliation, I'd like to acknowledge the Anishinaabe, Huron-Wendat, and Haudenosaunee traditional territories upon which we are gathered today. And I would also like to thank the organizers for having me. It's an honor to be here, and everyone for spending some of your evening with us. It's a great honor to be able to share this space with you and speak with you. Something that has prepared me for politics is I'm in my 10th year right now of teaching, and I teach grades 7 and 8. I teach at a public elementary school in Bowmanville. I grew up between Newcastle and Bowmanville my whole life, chose to stay there, choosing to live there and continue to live there and raise a family there, work there. I think that something that I've learned over the past while has been that you need to build relationships. So it's all about relationships, whether you agree with someone or you don't agree with someone. It's working together, right? And that is really fostered on looking after each other, taking care of one another, and having that empathy and being able to foster those relationships. So I think that's something that I bring to the table, as well as, I could definitely be a strong voice for Durham. I definitely have the knowledge and the confidence to do so. So I'm hoping that I have your support on October 21st. Thank you.
Thanks, Sarah. Okay, now we'll go into our questions. These questions have been prepared in advance, and if I'm correct, they were submitted and vetted by the organizers of this debate. The first question is around the issue of climate change and climate change challenges. And I will start with you, Brenda.
Okay.
If elected, will you work for Canada reaching the target of reducing carbon emissions to net zero? How will we know? How will we monitor that this is being accomplished?
Thank you. That's a very good question. The People's Party of Canada, believes that the climate is always changing, which it is, and we know especially in Canada it changes a lot in the winter and the summer. However, we do not agree with the climate emergency that is going on. It causes people to panic and think that it's the end of the world. Through history, I don't know if you realize, but back in the 17 and 1800s, there was a warming period, and then there was actually a mini ice age. And that happened before the Industrial Revolution, before we were emitting a bunch of carbon as human beings on the planet. So the planet goes through these different cycles, and we don't always understand why. Sometimes it can be caused by, the sun and the gravitational axis of the Earth as it turns around, and other factors like the ocean currents, and we don't always understand how it all happens. Now, I believe that man does have some part in the climate change that is going on, but actually our nation has so many trees. Canada should be paid by the UN for our trees eating up all the carbon, because Canada's carbon emissions, compared to the whole global amount, is 1.6%, a very small amount. So I think that it's kind of blown out of proportion by the media, and right now the targets that we have are so low that it's making negligent changes. There's a report out of British Columbia that said it's less than 1%, the changes they've made, but it has increased gas taxes, and that is not really good for our nation and good for our people. So again, we're for the people to have a better life in Canada, and we are going to do away with the carbon tax altogether because we don't believe it's effective in making any changes.
Thank you, Brenda.
Thank you.
I just want to point out, by cutting you off like that, I'm going to be very strict about the 2 minutes.
Okay, can you explain the timekeepers?
Yes, the timekeeper has a card there, and that, when she's on that side, which you may not be able to read, but basically says, you got a minute left.
Okay, thank you.
And then when she turns it around to the red, you're out. Okay? Okay.
Got it, thank you.
Thank you. Now on to Sarah. Do you remember the question?
I do indeed. Reducing carbon emissions to net zero. How will we know this? Yes, I got it. I made my little notes. Something that I'm really, really proud of as an educator, and something that I have seen that makes me, it absolutely warms my heart, is youth and our younger generation taking on this climate emergency, this climate crisis head on. I absolutely love it. It makes me so proud. It brings a little tear to my eye sometimes. I wasn't able to make it to the climate march in Toronto, but a couple of my family members, my mom and my sister went. My sister's younger than me. And the videos that I got from that and the pictures that I got from that and things that I was seeing on the media, I mean, it was incredible. So that's just a personal standpoint there. I think that it's fantastic what our young people are doing, and good for them. Keep it up. Something that the NDP wants to do, we have big plans around addressing this climate crisis. We do believe that it is an emergency and that it's something that it does need our attention, and it needs our attention right now, not later. So a line that has been thrown out there is, we can't do nothing. So what are we going to do? We definitely want to look into green technologies. We want to invest in retrofitting for green infrastructure, for achieving that net zero, the net zero carbon emission. We also want to invest in zero emission vehicles, and we'll do that by providing subsidies to companies and to the consumers as well. So it'll be easier to purchase, it'll be easier to manufacture, And then, offset from that, the plan is to create about 300,000 green jobs.
Thank you, Sarah. Next, Jonathan.
Thanks, Stephen. Thank you for the question. And I just want to say I appreciate the conservative opinion on this. It's good to have one at the table. But climate change is one thing that we pride ourselves on because we were the government that announced that it was we have a climate emergency on our hands. And going back to Sarah's point of youth engaged in climate change. I was at the Port Perry Climate March where it was organized by a girl named Jordan who was in grade 10. And I thought that was phenomenal. It was a fantastic turnout. And it's a great way to raise awareness about climate change. Some of the things we're doing, we plan on planting 2 billion trees. And I've made the statement that I want to start here in Durham. And so what we're going to do is we're also going to invest in charging stations across Canada, and we're going to make it more affordable to buy an electric vehicle. We're going to provide a subsidy for used electric vehicles. And we also, so our carbon emissions target is we want to go to net neutrality, zero emissions by 2050. So those are just some of the things that we're going to do, and we want to continue to do more. There's a lot to be done on climate change, and we know that, and we're going to continue to work and invest in our climate and green energy.
Thank you. Just a follow-up question to that. We're joined by Aaron O'Toole. Aaron, welcome. At this point, I'm just going to go back and allow Aaron to do his introductory comments for 2 minutes, if you'd like to do that. Or do you just want to join in?
I would appreciate that opportunity.
Go ahead.
Thank you very much. And apologies for my being late. I was at the memorial service of someone I served in the RCAF with who died tragically of cancer. He was the piper at our wedding, and it was in Nova Scotia. So some things, families, friends, service, are as important or more than politics, so I apologize for being late. This was the only night available for the debate, and I'm trying to do both. My focus as MP is to be a strong voice for our community, and particularly our economic future. Durham has had no seat at the table for the last 4 years. Previously, it always had 2 strong voices at the cabinet table, and we need to make sure that the next decade is Durham's. We're behind in where we should be in terms of infrastructure. We've got an economic situation, in large part due to Mr. Trudeau, where GM is leaving. We see uncertain farm prices from trade disruptions. So the economic future of our region and jobs for mom and dads and a family are core to the well-being of the family, to the economy, and to our communities. I've also been very proud to be a strong and vocal voice for our first responders, for volunteers, for mental health, a number of initiatives where I think my experience before office, and as I said, I think that's important to have a track record building the community before you seek to represent it, will continue. I'm known as a champion, and if I'm fortunate enough to be returned, I will remain a strong and respected voice for our region. Thank you.
Thank you, Aaron. So, Aaron, when you came in, just as the 3 other candidates at the table, the Green candidate had to apologize at the last minute and won't be attending. But the 3 other candidates had just finished answering the question, if elected, will you work for Canada reaching the target of reducing carbon emissions to net zero, and how will we know that this is being carried out? And I was just about to ask a follow-up question, which is, in the event that doesn't seem quite possible at this point, of a minority government, how will parties work together across party lines to accomplish these goals? So I'm going to combine those 2 questions to you, Aaron, and let you answer the first question that everybody else has answered already.
Sure, thank you for the opportunity. I'll try and provide a response to both. I'm a firm believer in Canada making its Paris targets and becoming a world leader in not just ways to reduce carbon emission, but to be a world leader in the technology. I'm the only candidate on this stage that has a track record before running for office on environmental issues as a volunteer. We see the salmon running on the Bowmanville Creek in the Fish Bypass Channel. I was proud to work with other volunteers in the community to help work on conservation. I ran an environmental luncheon series, and I'm known as a green Tory, so to speak. My concern with a carbon tax is it's actually not going to reduce greenhouse gases or make our Paris targets. The Parliamentary Budget Officer has confirmed that, in large part because Mr. Trudeau has exempted the large emitters from the tax, and that accounts for about 1/3 of our national emissions. So we need a plan that doesn't give a pass to the remaining coal plants, to large emitters, and focuses a tax on single seniors, for example. We need something that works with large emitters, that takes the emission and carbon footprint down on federal infrastructure, and incentivizes households to get their carbon footprint down, not by taxing them. I'm known for working across party lines. Shortly after my election, I worked with Romeo Dallaire on a major mental health initiative that has grown throughout the Durham region with Wounded Warriors Canada, but has worked to help first responders and our veterans across the country. I'm known for working across party lines on major issues, and this is one, another one like first responders is something that I can see myself playing an important role.
Thank you. On the second part of the question, working across party lines, Brenda Virtue, comments on that?
Well, of course, I would work with across party lines in anything that's need to be done. But as I said, the People's Party has a position that we will abolish the carbon tax completely because it is not doing anything to reduce emissions. And as I said, Canada's emissions are 1.6% of the global emissions, so it's very negligible, and the carbon tax doesn't do anything to decrease them. So, but we would work across party lines to find things that will help with the climate altogether.
Thank you. Sarah?
Our party, the NDP, would be pleased to work with any minority government that recognizes that the climate emergency is just that, and it is an emergency, and it is a crisis, and wants to do something about it. So we'd also be willing to work with a party that would end subsidies to all fossil fuel, industries, and it would also, we'd also be interested in working with a party who would be willing to have something in place, right? The NDP it believes in keeping the carbon tax because it's working so far. I mean, it's something in place to help us with this emergency, and we want to even go further with that. So it would have to be a party that would be taking things seriously around the environmental crisis.
Thank you. Jonathan?
I think, we as a government have proven that, other parties are our friends and neighbors, and I would personally work with, Conservatives or the NDP on the climate change issue. But I do want to address one thing on the largest emitters, and this is where Aaron is wrong. We are not exempting the largest emitters. That is not true. It was fact-checked on CBC right after the debate, so that is not true, and I'm actually kind of surprised you'd lie to residents of Durham.
Thank you all.
I'll have a rebuttal there, I understand.
If you'd like, yes.
Yep. Large emitters are exempted up to 90%. So that's largely an exemption from the tax. And why did they do this? Why did they do this? There is something that the government terms leakage. And large emitters that could move their operation to the United States is a risk to the economy. So that's why Justin Trudeau did exempt all these players. Rather than work on a North American solution, even while President Obama was in place, he unilaterally imposed a tax that is largely based on residential and small business taxation. And remember, an auto parts manufacturer here in Curtis competes against plants in Ohio, Pennsylvania, with no input cost on carbon. It's a large part of why GM is leaving, along with tariffs and trade disruption, both laying at the feet of Mr. Trudeau. So we have to reduce our emissions. I think we can work better with the large emitters.
sorry.
Not give them a 90% exemption.
Sorry, and that's the first rebuttal, so let me just clarify the rules on the rebuttal so that we all know. It's 1 minute.
Okay.
You want a rebuttal as well?
Yes.
Go ahead.
The People's Party of Canada believes that Canadians are being taxed to death. So we want to decrease taxes, not increase them. And the carbon tax is one that really has to go completely because it doesn't do anything to reduce emissions within any negligible amount that's going to make a difference. So I believe that people need less taxes of all kinds. We need less red tape so we can get more businesses going and for Canadians to have a better life and Canada to be the truly best country in the world.
Thank you. You want to crack at this, Sarah? Or are you done?
I'm good. I'll take a
Thank
crack
you.
at it. Sure.
Sure.
Yeah, we're good? Okay. So I think that with the NDP, another way that we like to look at things is making different choices, right? So not giving the subsidies to those large emitters, the fossil fuel subsidies to large corporations, those kind of things. We can make different choices, right? We can make choices about purchasing pipelines. We can make choices about, giving tax breaks to the richest of the rich. Those kind of things, those are really what we're thinking about, is making a different choice.
Thank you, Sarah. Last shot, Jonathan.
Thank you. So I just want to thank Aaron for admitting that he did make a false statement. But the reason we do this is because that we are protecting our economy. We're protecting jobs. And Sarah mentioned the pipeline. We purchased that pipeline because we're going to, A, we want to use the funds to invest in green energy. And B, the world is not going to stop using oil because Canada can't ship it abroad, right? We want to create jobs and keep the jobs that are, we want to stop people from losing their jobs. That's the bottom line.
Thank you. Moving on to the next question. How will your party help Clarington to reduce, or better yet, eliminate emissions from the Durham York incinerator and the St. Mary's cement in exchange to 100% renewable energy? Start with you, Sarah.
This is something that the NDP is really interested in, is looking at cleaner technologies, greener technologies, while maintaining jobs. Because we know that that's important in Clarington, we know that that's important in all of Durham riding, we know that that's important across the country. So the way that we would look at this is Canada has a huge amount of untapped greener resources that we can use, right? So looking at the incinerator and biomass options, it's there, right? We have it in Clarington, but it's something that we'd like to look at, eventually, once we have the technology in place. It would be fantastic to see newer technologies take those things over. But we have to look at issues. We're not naive to the fact that we have to look at issues like the baseload power and things like that. So we obviously know that there's some work to do, but we're hopeful that we can look into supporting that baseload demand with cleaner technology. So right now, solar won't cut it on its own. Right now, wind won't cut it on its own. But with further study and further investment, we can build these technologies up, and it's something that we're really hopeful that we can do in the coming years.
Thank you. Jonathan?
So it's an interesting question because I actually met with a few stakeholders today regarding both the incinerator and St. Mary's cement. And so from my understanding, the incinerator is not at capacity. It's at 140 tons annually, or 140,000 tons annually, as opposed to the 160,000 tons which would produce fewer emissions. And in regards to St. Mary's has moved from coal over to wood burning, so it does reduce emissions, but we know there's a lot to do. We have to work with both organizations, but with the incinerator and St. Mary's, to see how we can continue to reduce emissions, because ultimately we want to get to zero emissions by 2050. And that requires working with stakeholders. So this is something I would like to be a champion of, and work with the community as well. Thank you.
Aaron?
Thank you. Going back to, Jonathan, my discussion of 90% versus 100, St. Mary's has a 90% exemption from the Trudeau carbon tax. The nice thing is with technology, they've been looking at getting their footprint down. They still do use coal, Jonathan, but they are working on everything from specific types of algae. They're actually marketing a low GHG emission process cement. So I think innovation has to be key. And I do think it's responsible for municipalities and provinces to come up with a way for people to deal with both reducing the production of garbage, single-use plastics, a whole range of things. But people should handle their own waste decisions. They're difficult decisions. And, you know, I grew up in high school in Bowmanville, and I remember when Toronto was looking at our area for a dump for Metro, and there was the no Metro dump movement. So I think there's controversy with landfill, controversy with incineration, but I think it's responsible for regions, whether it's Durham and York, to work together on those solutions. I also think it's important at this point, because we're basically talking about a bit of our industrial lakefront. Darlington is something I've been a strong promoter of. What's interesting with the various parties is they talk a really good game on climate change, but they generally don't support nuclear. Nuclear power is 60% of our electricity in Ontario, and it's greenhouse gas emission free. So when the issue came up in our Port Perry debate, I was the only one supportive. At the power workers debate, Jonathan is somewhat, but the challenge the Greens and the NDP have is they're non-supportive of that technology, which is important for climate change and for our local economy.
Thank you. Brenda?
Well, thank you very much, Aaron, because I do agree that nuclear power is the clean energy, it's safe, and is really the best that we have. And I think that we need to continue to invest in nuclear energy. And as far as St. Mary's cement plant goes, did you realize that cement is the second most used substance in the world next to water? Cement, think about that. Cement sidewalks, cement buildings, cement everywhere. It's the second most used substance in the world next to water. That is amazing. So I think we're very lucky to have the St. Mary's cement plant in our riding, because it supplies a lot of jobs, but it also supplies problems. I have friends that live across the highway, and when they do blasting, they get the notice, but their windows shake and they feel like it's a little mini earthquake there. And that is a difficulty that they have to live with. So there are drawbacks and there's also benefits with both. And I know the incinerator, when it was being considered in the first place, so many people were concerned about emissions, and people are still concerned about the emissions from the incinerator. And especially with the talk of increasing the capacity of the incinerator. So these things, I believe, need to be dealt with technology. And I'm so glad that UOIT is in our writing, because, Oshawa is shifting from a GM town to a university town. And so out of UOIT, there's going to come a lot of entrepreneurs who are going to find solutions for the problems that we're facing today in these areas of emissions with the cement plant, with the incinerator. And so I'm so thankful that we have that going on in our writing to help us in the future, because we believe that research and innovation are what are going to help us in the future to have a better life in Ontario and in Durham riding.
Thank you. I'm going to move on to transportation at this point. The federal government contributed financially during the Harper government for the construction of Highway 418 in Curtis, and their EA claimed that there would not be negative effects on the groundwater, air, water, soil, and health of the residents. After building this highway, we are now experiencing air and noise pollution, flooding, drought, and runoff that is damaging infrastructure. If elected, what can your government do to address these problems? We'll start with you, Jonathan.
Well, transportation is a major issue in Clarington, and in the Durham riding as a whole. We need to get people moving, and whether it would be the 412 or the 407, or sorry, the 418 or the 407. It's about getting people moving, right? And I think in terms of 418 and the 407, what we really want to do is we want to invest more in transit to make things greener. And one of the ways we're going to do that is we're going to work with the provinces to buy zero-emission transit vehicles and provide subsidies for that. You know, it would have been nice to have a GO train to Bowmanville. I was in favor of it, and have it north of the 401. My colleague here will tell you that there was no money for it, but there was, and we know that Conservatives cut and make cuts to, whether it be education, transit being a big one. So, we need to invest more in transit, and that so that we can get people moving from point A to point B. Thank you.
Aaron?
Thank you. The question was slightly incorrect. There was federal money provided by the late Jim Flaherty for the completion of the 407. The connectors were more of a provincial decision with respect to where, and I know the issue of tolls on them right now is being looked at provincially, but the completion of the 407 to the 115 was the major investment by the federal government. I do think the question raises a good point, though, on when there's some of these developments, what impact does it have on the watershed? I know this debate originally was by the Friends of the Farewell. I'm not sure if that's still the group doing it. I know Libby's still involved. I was very proud to be able to secure some grants over a number of years for the conservation authorities with respect to wetland protection, conservation. A number of those are very, very important, and I think that's something that we could look at in terms of mitigating some of the impact of development, be it roads, be it residential development, that sort of thing. As Jonathan knows, I'm a big supporter of getting transit to Clarington. Another high school reference, and I'm seeming old now, but the GO train to Bowmanville has been talked about since I was in high school and even before that. And I think it was unfair to people in Ontario to have ribbon cuttings and billboards, but no money to be put forward for the bridge crossing. And that's about $700 million, and it was not financed through the Treasury Board, and that's how government spending works. I think that Metrolinx needs to do a better public outreach because there's still people that believe it's on the lakeshore line that don't even know about the Northern Crossing. So if there's any ability for the federal government, like we did with the 407, to get federal money to get this moving to Clarington, we will do that.
Brenda?
I agree that the GO train getting to Bowmanville would make a big difference in transit because so many of the people that live in our riding are commuting to Toronto to work. And so that is a big part of their day, driving, especially in traffic. And despite the 407, the 401 is full, especially at rush hour. It's hard to get anywhere sometimes. So the problem of runoff and damaging infrastructure, that's something that I had not heard about before, so it's something that I would have to learn more about, actually.
Thank you. Sarah?
In agreement with fellow speakers up here and candidates, it is important, obviously, to have the GO train come to Bowmanville, more accessible transit for anyone that's, tried to get around using transit in town. It's not the easiest, maybe not the most convenient, I guess. So it'd be really nice to see stuff like that improve. And looking at the Highway 18 expansion and the groundwater pollution and air pollution and flooding and things that this has caused, a really, really big thing that I am proud that the NDP wants to put in place and supports is that consultation with communities. So consultation with the municipality, with stakeholders in the community, with the provincial government. We talked earlier about working together. That's a major part of the NDP commitment to, hopefully avoiding problems such as this or minimizing them at the very least. A big part of that would be consultation for sure.
Thank you. Well, let's follow that up with a specific question with respect to infrastructure. We know that mass transit, alternate forms of transportation are extremely expensive. We know that there's a lot of talk about the federal government putting in a lot of money to build further subway lines to service Toronto. But there doesn't seem to be any systematic approach and a real clear commitment federally to cost share and partner with provinces and municipalities to build this mass transit that's so important in places like the 905 area around Toronto. What would you do and what would your party do to commit to this dedicated, sustained funding, such as increasing the federal gas tax that is already received by municipalities? We'll start with you, Aaron.
Sure, thank you. It's a great question. In fact, this is an area where when we were in government, we actually took an idea that began with Paul Martin, which was sharing the gas tax, some of the revenues with the provinces and with the municipalities specifically. We took that idea, it was a good idea, and actually locked it in as guaranteed and indexed it so that it would be a steady stream to the regional levels of government and with the provinces as well to make sure that there was that predictable stream. I would like to see that even enhanced. And then partnerships with respect.
What does enhanced mean? The big city mayors are asking for a significant increase in the gas tax. Does your party support that?
We have provided that in the past. We don't have a specific increase in our platform, but as I said, we took an idea that began with Paul Martin and actually locked it in. And so it is now a guaranteed stream of revenue, and I think those sort of guaranteed streams should be continued so that our municipal partners and regional partners can plan their infrastructure needs. I do think specific capital investments where we partner for something like the GO train, or in the case of Mr. Scheer's announcement recently for some of the transit expansion in Toronto, those would be partnerships. What concerns me is Oshawa's Port Authority. Mr. Trudeau removed Oshawa's role over its own port and actually merged it with Hamilton. They allowed Toronto to be exempt, so it didn't turn into a Great Lakes Port Authority or Lake Ontario Port Authority. They gave really the decisions over our local regional port and handed it to Hamilton with virtually no local consultation. That wouldn't happen under a Conservative government.
Thank you. Brenda?
Well, the People's Party, again, is about less taxes, not more gas taxes, not more taxes of any kind, because what we are up to is stopping corporate handouts. Why do we give Bombardier billions of dollars? If we didn't do that, we would have money to put into our infrastructure. And I have to say, driving on the roads in Clarington, some of them are just awful with potholes and so bumpy and difficult to traverse. And I think that a lot more needs to be put into our infrastructure in every way, transit-wise, because we are a country that moves from one place to another. It's not usually walking, we're driving or riding in a bus. And so I think that roads especially are very critical for our getting from one place to another. And having more money to put into infrastructure is a critical thing that we need at this point.
Thank you. Sarah?
I think when we talk about infrastructure, it's been mentioned before in the question actually that, a lot of the time we go toward the cities, right? And we think about, okay, well, the subway is expanding, we're doing this work here, we're doing that work there. But something that the NDP really wants to focus on is rural communities as well as the cities. They're not saying they're not important, but we live out here in Clarington, right? So we'd like to see some investment here as well. So in our platform, it actually says that it's time that municipalities and provinces had a federal partner to help them out with things like this. So we would look at expanding and modernizing, as I said, retooling different transit services so that they're more green technologies, looking at expanding and having more services for bus routes and northern bus routes, northern transit as well, because that's, starts to get into, that's a part of our riding as well in the north. And something that we looked at is, we want to implement is free fare transit to encourage people to go that way, because sometimes it can be expensive. If we have more transit, we have different alternatives, and it's free fare transit, I mean, that would be something that would be a little more enticing for people, I think, to use the services. And then, like I said before, helping out with the manufacturers and with the people wanting to buy, those zero emission vehicles, things like that, I think would help out tremendously.
Thank you. Jonathan.
Thank you, Steve. So one of the things we did in 2019 is we doubled the gas tax budget. The gas tax fund in budget 2019. So this funded over $2.2 billion worth of infrastructure projects across Canada. And we, as a government, also made one of the largest investments in GO Transit for one of their largest transit expansion projects across Ontario, which would have included, the Bowmanville GO Station, which, we hear a lot about the GO train being north of the 401 and servicing rural communities, and it would have, right? Through bus routes. It would have got transit up to areas like Nestleton. However, we unfortunately it was cut, and we have one candidate on the stage who talks about transit into the northern areas of the riding, but advocates for transit south of the 401, which I find completely absurd because it makes no logical sense. But these are some of the things we're doing. We're investing in transit, and we want to continue to do that. Thank you.
Thank you. Rebuttal? 1 minute?
1 minute. Two things. I advocate for real results, not photos, not billboards like Kathleen Wynne did. And I'm agnostic really to the route, south or north of the 401, but people deserve honesty and a real debate. Second, I want to compliment Sarah for talking about the specific needs about small communities, and she tweaked my memory. We had a small communities infrastructure fund that we made great use of when I was in government here in Clarington and Scugog and Uxbridge at the time was in the riding. All communities under 100,000, and that was the qualifying feature. Clarington's running out of that room, but that helped each community have dedicated infrastructure funding based on their priorities, but it made sure that they didn't have to compete in the same pot with the Torontos and the Vancouvers. It was a dedicated small communities fund. We're committed to bringing that same approach back and then letting them pick the priority.
Thank you. Further? Go ahead.
As the People's Party, we're against corporate welfare, which right now is running about $14 billion annually. That's a lot of money that could be poured back into our nation to deal with infrastructure and to deal with these problems that we're talking about. And, right now the government is giving away a lot of money to other countries that would usually go into the pockets of corrupt politicians instead of actually causing any climate change in Africa. So we are against the government giving away so much money to other people and other causes instead of taking care of Canadians first.
Thank you. I'm going to talk a little bit about healthcare. Healthcare is quite largely a provincial jurisdiction, but the federal government has a significant role in healthcare, especially with respect to funding. And there's been a lot of talk about pharmacare and the introduction of pharmacare. Do you support pharmacare, and if so, do you support universal single-payer pharmacare, or do you support a system that would piggyback on the existing subsidies that are already there, and how would you pay for it? We'll start with you, Brenda.
So the People's Party realizes that right now there's a great divide between the provinces and the federal government, because they blame each other for not having enough money for health care. I'm a nurse. I retired from Bonneville Hospital recently, and I've seen firsthand the difficulties in nursing and in the hospital. You know, people aren't getting the care that they need fast enough, and the money is not seeming to be there. But because of that situation, the People's Party is going to give the money, the responsibility back to the provinces for dealing with healthcare, which is a provincial issue, and help them to have the money to be able to do it instead of fighting over whose fault is it that there isn't enough healthcare.
Thank you, Sarah.
This is a major part of the NDP party platform, and it's something that I believe in really strongly. So the NDP and myself, we would fight for, we would implement universal, single-payer pharmacare across the board, and it would help when we have various provincial governments that come in looking for efficiencies, looking to make cuts. What they look first, they look at education, they look at healthcare, they look at the most vulnerable, it seems. And being a teacher, I've felt the results of this. I'm feeling it right now. We continue to feel it. It's really something else. So returning to healthcare, how will we pay for it? That's the question, right? That's the big question. We'll pay for it with a wealth tax. So it's not going to raise taxes on everyday constituents. It's not going to raise taxes on working Canadians. It will raise taxes for people that have a wealth of $20 million or more. I know for sure that is not myself. There are very few of these people in our country, but this would provide enough money to help out, you know, our fellow Canadians. So I think that it's a great idea. I think that people that make that much money, I mean, they won't miss a little bit extra in taxes. I think it's about taking care of people. I think it's about looking out for one another, and I think it's what's better for the greater good. So that's how we'll pay for it. That's the plan, head to toe, mental health care, dental care, everything you need. You shouldn't have to worry.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Sarah. Jonathan?
Thank you, Steve. So as a government, we've made significant investments in healthcare, and we're going to continue to do so. On the pharmacare front, you know, we were the first government to start a commission to look at to look into this, right? We brought on Dr. Aaron Hoskins to put together a commission to see if this was feasible and this is something we should do. You know, we're going to work towards our goal of that. A re-elected Liberal government is going to continue to invest in healthcare, whether it would be through the provinces, increasing transfers. You know, we plan on making sure that everyone has a family doctor, and that's a significant part of this, a part of healthcare. Excuse me, and it's just something we want to work towards, right? Healthcare should be a nonpartisan issue. We've worked so hard on this. We're going through cuts now, unfortunately, but we as a federal government want to continue to invest in healthcare.
Thank you. Aaron?
This is an important question. I appreciate it. It is largely a provincial area of jurisdiction with three key exceptions. Indigenous Canadians, and we collectively, both parties have not done a very good job historically on those healthcare provisions, as well as military families and veterans. And just in the last week, it came out that the Trudeau government's been trying to cut and download the contracting of military family and veteran healthcare unilaterally without consulting the provinces. So those are actually the three areas of specific jurisdiction for the federal government. Mr. Scheer, our leader, has said that we would increase health and social transfers by 3% per year, more if the economy's doing very well. And he made a specific commitment of $1.5 billion for diagnostic imaging because decisions related to treatment are often held up while waiting for a CAT scan or an MRI, that sort of thing. So that would be a specific investment that allows all provinces to have more access to those tools. It's not actually telling the province how to run their system, it's providing them with more key tools for decisions for healthcare professionals. Jonathan's right. The Liberal Party has promised pharmacare. Actually, they first promised it in 1997. So we should be very skeptical. My concern is if we take all the insurance funds out of the pharmacare system, what will happen is we will have a lower formulary that serves fewer people with fewer options, including biologic drugs. So what I would like to see is seniors and vulnerable Canadians provided for, rare disease, where the federal government steps in to make sure that if a province is not going to list something because of exorbitant costs, but it's key for the health care of a child or something, the federal government can help step in to make sure that access is uniform across the provinces. So there is a role, but promising something without being able to deliver builds cynicism.
Thank you. As we said at the beginning, we're also going to take, in addition to these prepared questions, questions from the audience. We have a microphone set up right here. If you would like to ask questions, I'd ask you to line up behind that microphone. I take it that says you want to ask questions. I'm just going to ask one more question, and then I will go to some questions from the floor. But if you just want to line up there, I will get to your questions very shortly. I have another specific, more local issue to ask. It has to do with Lake Ontario flooding and its effect on private properties. Lake Ontario is regulated at the Moses Saunders Dam, and a new regulation plan was brought into effect in 2017 by the International Joint Commission. While this plan did not cause the flooding, this plan makes the flooding much worse and extends it for months at a time and increases the risk for next year of flooding once again. If water is not released out of the dam before the end of December, a third Lake Ontario event in 4 years is virtually guaranteed. This is not climate change, this is dam management, and the people cannot endure it. What is your position with respect to monitoring flows to the dam and controlling the flooding and erosion that is affecting Clarington, Whitby, and all the lakeshore municipalities on Lake Ontario? I think it's time for Sarah to start.
That's a really good question. It's one that hits close to home for us, right? I have been down at Lake Ontario filling the sand bags to put along the lake shore, and I've seen how it's a scary thing for people when you live down there, not knowing how high that water is going to rise, how long it's going to be there for. So it's really a serious issue. And I think it comes down again to consultation. So who are we talking to about this, right? The federal government should be stepping in and saying, okay, we're going to work with the provinces, with the municipalities. Where is that consultation, right? That needs to happen. That's something that's really, really important. And it goes along also with protecting our waterways and our lakes and our green spaces. I think that there's definitely a place for the federal government to play a role in this and to help out and be a helping hand in this, because it really is, it's something that is near and dear to us here in Clarington, and it's something that I would absolutely champion for in the House of Commons.
Thank you. Jonathan?
So in terms of flooding, so my background is, for the record, I'm not an insurance broker when I say this, but I work in risk management underwriting for property, home and auto, for an insurance company. And flooding is a massive issue. It's not just Lake Ontario, it's all across Ontario. And it's something that we need to work with our stakeholders with. I would happily champion that, but I think we need to community consultations along with experts in the field, and to work with them and to see if we can find a solid solution.
Thank you. Aaron?
Thank you. This has been a challenging issue for the residents of Cedar Crest Beach and a number of people in the community. And I've been consulting with the residents there, with councillors and MPPs all the way down to Prescott, some of the communities impacted, as well as the province, Cloca, St. Mary's, Clarington. I brought the International Joint Commission here to talk about Plan 2014. And most of the residents, I see some of them here tonight, believe that there's probably a multiplicity of causes. the plan or the dam being one, climate change being potentially another, and potentially beach erosion from the pier. I've heard each of those three concerns from the community, and what we have to do is try and see, can we play a role in terms of mitigation funding, whether it's climate change and adaptation funding, whether it's addressing specific acute risks for our area, or if it's having a full review of Plan 2014. I'm fine with that, but I'm always clear when I tell people that let's try and work on problems together. Let's also try and bring everyone to the table. I'm probably the only elected official at any level of government that's talked to all of those stakeholders, including other municipal councils, reeves, and MPPs. So this is an issue that I think with climate change adaptation funding or mitigation funding, we could see something that could prevent some of the surge impact to the flooding. And I certainly would continue to work with the community and all the conservation authorities and others to get that solution. But we also have to bring parties to the table, including St. Mary's and others that I've spoken to about residents' concerns.
Thank you. Brenda?
Well, I think we all appreciate the efforts that you've made, Aaron, in that area, and it is definitely a problem. Living in Bowmanville myself, I have never, ever in my life heard of Lake Ontario rising a whole foot like it did this past winter. And the flooding is horrendous, and it's getting worse every year, it seems, especially with the torrential rains we have. So I agree with Aaron that everybody has to come to the table and find a solution that's more permanent, because the erosion on the beach with those houses so close to the water is devastating to those homeowners. And like you said, it's not just here in our riding, it's all around the lake. So I agree that a permanent solution needs to be found in it. Again, we're looking for research and innovation that can think of something outside the box, something different, something new that can make a difference in this area.
Thank you. We're going to take some questions from the floor now. And I just ask you, in prefacing your question, to introduce yourself, state your name, and try to state the question in as concise and direct a form as possible, and try not to repeat specific questions that have already been asked. Go ahead.
Great. My name is Brian McCauley. I'm a resident of Curtis for 20 years now. I've been the chair of the Alzheimer's Society of Durham Region for the last 3 years. And I have a question that's about the disease. As of today, there are over 500,000 Canadians living with dementia, plus about 25,000 new cases diagnosed every year. By 2031, which is only 11 years away, that number is expected to rise by just under 1 million people across the country. So can you comment on your knowledge of the recently announced National Dementia Strategy and how you will support this strategy and those living with this terrible and growing epidemic?
Jonathan, starting with you.
Thank you, and that's a fantastic question. So to give you a little background about my experience with dementia, my grandfather, who is probably one of the biggest reasons I'm in politics, or want to be in politics, had dementia. And so I know how it impacts families. And one of my best friends is actually Kyle Fitzgerald, who is the government relations for the Alzheimer's Society. So on the National Dementia Strategy, you know, sorry, give me a second. It's an area that lies near and dear to my heart. Yes, I want to help people. Let's put it that way. You know, I want to be able to stop what happened, you know, or prevent or help families that went through what we went through with my grandparents. I've read the National Dementia Strategy of having worked with Kyle, and he's done a fantastic job on it, as well as the rest of the organization putting that plan together. So I would definitely work with the Alzheimer's Society on that one. Thank you.
Aaron?
Thank you, Brian, for the question and for your willingness to step up and take that role. I think all of us have had people in their families that have been impacted directly, and we see with the aging population the huge challenge we're facing, not just in our healthcare system, but in homes and care providers and families. We certainly started to tackle it through a national strategy through creating Brain Canada. That was an initiative of Prime Minister Harper to direct some specific federal R&D spending on this specific issue. Lisa Raitt, my colleague, has been very public about her partner's early onset Alzheimer's and has become a champion in our time in opposition. And this is something on the strategy we take a nonpartisan view on, because we have to also raise public awareness about the role of caregivers. We changed the EI system to allow some respite leave for people that are taking care of people in the home. That's been continued. And then one of my local initiatives, the Durham Wellness Hub, was to try and bring together as many mental health and wellness resources together, because in my outreach, first with first responders, but then with a whole range of constituents, I found between the province, communities, regional, there were so many services, but it was hard to sort of see where you could meet like-minded people, navigate. So we tried through the Wellness Hub to bring some of these folks together to help people navigate the system. And, you know, I'd be happy to talk to you more about that, because I think we need people who have navigated the system to be the Sherpa for new families that are just overwhelmed by a level one that faces a lot of challenges. So we'd be happy to work with you on that.
Thank you. Brenda?
As a nurse, I've cared for many patients that have dementia and Alzheimer's. And there's a book called The 25-Hour Day. And just the title alone explains what caregivers go through at home. How do they sleep when the person that they're caring for, that's usually their loved one, often their spouse, is wandering around and they're not sleeping? It's very difficult. It's a horrendous problem for families to deal with. And you know, more resources need to be put into research and innovation to find better answers, you know, for what actually causes it and what can help. You know, so I think that that's where we need to pour our attention into, as well as supporting the caregivers especially, because they are just being worn out by taking care of the people that they love so much. But again, it's not the person that they used to be, and that makes it much more difficult, especially when they get into a stage where they become hostile. And that's very, very difficult. And, you know, as nurses, we deal with that in the hospital a lot, especially at nighttime when people, they call it the sundown syndrome, and they're not in their usual settings. And when the sun goes down, they kind of go a little bit crazy. And that's very difficult. And I just have so much compassion for people that are dealing with that at home. Thank you for your question.
Thank you. Sarah?
Yeah, thanks very much for the question, Brian. I was really lucky to be able to go and speak with some seniors in Port Perry, actually, at the Rivera retirement home there. And we had a fantastic discussion. And they actually shared with me that, you know, they felt that they were quite lucky and quite privileged to be where they are, because it's a beautiful, beautiful residence. But they said, you know, our neighbors from where we were before, our neighbors where we lived before, they're not so lucky, and some of them are ill, and some of them have Alzheimer's and you know, and dementia. And we talked about it, right? And it was sad, and you could see kind of the sadness in their eyes and the empathy in their tone, and it made me really proud to share with them that part of the NDP platform would be to create a national senior strategy. And that would include the national dementia strategy. So it's absolutely something that we would be willing to be a partner in and work with the national dementia strategy. And another plan too is to bring national care standards for long-term care and for home care into the Canada Health Act, because that would be something just to have that level playing field of care across our nation.
Thank you. Thank you. Next question.
Hello, my name is Alba, and I volunteer at a soup kitchen, and some of the people that come there are kids, and I don't think this is fair. So if you were elected, what would you do to help people in poverty and especially kids?
We'll start with you, Aaron.
Me?
Yep.
Thank you, Alva, and I've appreciated your advocacy on this and climate change and a number of issues, and thank you for volunteering. I think youth poverty and particularly poverty in general is something that really relates to two things. First is economic opportunity within our community. That's why I said my priority at the outset is to try and make sure that people that can work have the ability to work in our community. And I think personally, part of my philosophy is that purpose driven in your life is to be able to contribute to your family, to a cause, to a workplace. And so I was able to secure some specific youth employment funding for our area for youth at risk. And youth at risk were identified by people that had generally left the high school system, but a few years later wanted to come back and work. So we had a specific, one of the largest grants in the Durham region for that specific issue to help them get back on track. There's also, we could almost say, a crisis when it comes to mental health and the lack of resources to plug people into the supports they need. It's being exacerbated by some of the issues we've seen with the opioid crisis and other things. So I think the more we can provide those supports to young people in the high school setting, in the community, and specifically for mental health, if they get a good start, they generally won't have the problems or won't get in the cycle of poverty. But if they have a poor start, or if they leave school, or if they're struggling with a mental illness, that could be a roadblock to progressing in life. So they could actually be stuck in a cycle of poverty. So I think some of these issues are regional, provincial, federal. I work with anyone I can and partner with groups, agencies, churches, nonprofits to try and address these needs. If we're sharing the need, let's work together.
Thank you. Brenda.
I agree. This problem is it's a human problem, and it's devastating for people that are in the midst of that situation. And, you know, we say give a hand up, not a handout. But sadly, too often we're trying to give a handout instead of a hand up, which just increases the difficulty of the situation. And so it comes down to relationship, you know, to have people that are really willing to go into that situation and help people right where they're at, to be able to, you know, write a resume to get a job, to learn how to, you know, do an employment interview. People that are willing to come alongside a family that's having difficulty and not just throw money at the situation, but to really have relationship with people. And I think sadly in our culture, you know, we look at the government to fix things. But you know, before that, it used to be the church. It used to be the church that would take care of people that were in need. And it's so sad today that the church is not doing that more. We've abdicated so much of our responsibility to the government. And that's what the People's Party is about. Personal responsibility, individual freedom, respect, and fairness. And I would like to see that poverty taken care of so that children especially are not having to deal with that anymore.
Thank you. Sarah?
Thanks, Alba, for your question. That's an excellent question. You should be really proud of yourself for volunteering too. That's fantastic. It's really great to see young people out in the community helping out like that. So good for you. But it is, you know, it's really sad, and I don't think, you know, no one in this room wants to see anybody, especially a child, living in poverty. It's not. It shouldn't be a partisan issue, right? It shouldn't matter what political party you belong to. It's just not something that we should be seeing in our country. And unfortunately, we see it far too often. We see it in our communities, you know, here in Clarington. We see it in Indigenous communities across the country. It really is a problem. So something that the NDP would be is really proud to be presenting in our platform and some of our ideas are affordable housing, you know, having that subsidized housing so people have a place to call home, reducing costs overall, you know, the making life a little bit more affordable for people, like if they're ill, getting that health care that they need. And there's actually a target to end homelessness through these means in a decade, so within 10 years, because it really is a problem, and it really is sad to see.
Thank you. Jonathan?
So thank you for your question, and thank you for the volunteer work that you do. This is an important question. because it's not something that should be happening. You're absolutely right. It's not fair. And one of the things that we did and we started doing in 2015 was we created the Canada Child Benefit, which is to help parents with the costs of raising a child. I do agree with Aaron that, there are some other factors as well, such as mental health. My sister, who it's probably one of my, it's an emotional night. One of my biggest inspirations, I guess, in her ability to overcome mental health. So one of the things that we're going to do is we're going to open up the Health Act to include mental health. So we do want to increase funding. We're going to increase the Canada Child Benefit to help more children. In Durham alone, over 27,000 kids benefit from the Canada Child Benefit. I think we need to increase that. And yeah, that's a fantastic question, and thank you again for your volunteer work on this.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
Hi there. My name's Joe Solway. I live in Bowmanville. I've met a few of you in various times. First of all, I really want to thank all you, the four of you, for running. It takes a lot of hard work, and you really put yourself out there. And thank you all for being part of the democratic process. Because without you guys, we aren't who we are. Anyway, I think it's great that Alva volunteers at the soup kitchen. Actually, since I'm retired 2 years ago. Since my retirement, I've become really active in the community. One of the places is an organization called Feed the Need in Durham, which actually probably maybe even gets food to the soup kitchen she works in. But the reason I bring up Alva is that it's great that she's volunteering, but I would like to see, and I don't know how old Alva is, but with the number of people, the number of young people who are becoming more active in the political process, who are volunteering, and who are way smarter and know way more than I did when I was her age. I'm going to throw out the fact that for years I've thought the voting age should be lowered to 16. We see them out there saying, this is our future, don't screw with our future, please make the right decision. And I'm just wondering what your thoughts are on lowering the voting age to 16.
Thank you. Brenda, I think you start on this one.
Actually, science has shown that the adolescent brain doesn't fully mature till the age of 24. So to lower the age to 16, I appreciate your enthusiasm about that. And you're right, that kids are smarter these days. They're learning so much more than we ever knew at their age. But I believe that the age of 18 is a good way to start because it takes maturity to make those decisions, and it's the future of our country and our nation that's at stake. And I would say, partly look at the last election. The youth vote increased so much the last election. Why did it increase? Yes, Justin Trudeau was a younger man, but you know what? Legalizing marijuana was what brought a lot of young people out to vote. And I don't think that's really a healthy thing for any young brain. So I think that leaving the age at 18 is much wiser. Thank you for your question.
Thank you, Sarah.
Hi, Joe. Thanks very much for the question. I appreciate it. The NDP is one of the parties that is a party that is in favor of looking at this and looking at lowering the voting age to 16 years old. 16-year-olds